Fox has admitted to telling lies about Dominion that caused enormous damage to my company, our employees, and the customers that we serve. Nothing can ever make up for that.
Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. Well, it has, needless to say, been a pretty wild week for Fox News. They settled a $787 million, the lawsuit originally was $1.6 billion lawsuit that Fox News settled with Dominion Voting Systems for $787 million just last week.
Yes.
And within that, the Fox News did acknowledge the fact that they had said some lies or some mistruths, I suppose, about Dominion voting machines, who they alleged had been making some errant voting tabulations in regards to the 2020 election. That's obviously a big point of contention. And joining us for a bit more about this, what happened, and also what might be the future for Fox News in terms of some ongoing litigation, 9 News legal expert Whitney Trailer. Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.
For sure. It's good to be here, as always.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And again, I may not have explained that as well as I could have, but
Yeah.
the overview of the case, Dominion Voting Machines was Dominion Voting Systems, Denver-based company, by the way, was accused by Fox News, by several hosts on the air, of saying that they had some discrepancies within their voting machines, and that flipped the 2020 election to Joe Biden. Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, alleged this several times. Dominion Voting Systems got a big settlement out of Fox News, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. So essentially what happened was, this was a case about defamation. And so defamation is essentially what Dominion was saying, was that Fox News said, hey, they made these defamatory statements that Dominion was part of the election fraud, that their machines were used. And the question was that true? Was it communicated to the third party? And did it create damages? That's the elements of defamation. And so here, during the depositions and everything else, there was a lot of testimony that Fox executives and Fox hosts knew that these election lies were false, and yet they still publicized it because they knew that there was an audience for it. So they were really playing to the audience. And in every trial, you have civil trial, you have depositions where somebody has to sit across from a lawyer under oath and answer questions. And so that deposition testimony is then used at trial. So, and it's the same thing. If you're testifying at trial under oath, your testimony has the same weight. It's the same thing as if you're testifying in your deposition. And so what happened was, during the depositions, the text messages came out and all these other things, that Fox knew that the election wasn't stolen, essentially. And so that's what they were going to, so Dominion was suing, saying, you defamed us. You said these things that you knew weren't true, which creates the actual malice, and that caused us damages, because then they got death threats and people stopped wanting to use their machines because of these allegations. And so Fox settled it. And I honestly, I've been on your show many times. I've done many interviews, and I generally try and stay even-keeled and give both sides. But as it relates to whether the election was stolen, I can say as a legal analyst unequivocally that it was not stolen. And I can say that after years of analysis, because there's been so many cases, we know what everybody pled, and so I can say, no, the election wasn't stolen. So I actually wanted this case to go to trial, because the heart of the trial was, hey, you said that the election was stolen and Dominion was part of it. Let's see the evidence, right? So this would have been a trial exactly about whether those statements were true or false. So then we could have said to the entire world, you can see the evidence for yourself. You can see whether the election was stolen. So it didn't go to trial because it's settled, and that's not unusual in civil litigation to settle a lawsuit, because you're taking away the unknown. You have a definite number. When you go to trial, a judge or jury is going to determine your fate.
And appeals and things like that, which could delay the payment, correct?
That's exactly, and that could go on for years and years and years. There could be appeals, and then it could be remanded for another trial. So yeah, a lot of times after winning at the trial court level, you don't get closure for, I mean, it could go on 10, 20 years.
And by the way, to your point about the 2020 election not being stolen, you try to stay balanced. the judge in this case, also heading into the trial, which I think was a big setback for Fox News, ruled that the outcome of the 2020 election was not up for debate. And I think that was one of the big things that led to Fox coming to the table to settle, correct?
Yeah, the judge had already ruled that. Now, that wasn't dispositive of the motion, but
the jury was not allowed to consider that as part of the equation.
Right, and so, well, and this was in various motions and orders that the judge had previously issued. So the evidence was overwhelming, but any trial lawyer, as I am, will tell you nothing is guaranteed. I mean, I definitely have sides. I'd much rather have this side than this side, that kind of thing. And, But here I can say there was so much evidence. I mean, Fox was, I would have been shocked if Dominion didn't win that lawsuit.
Wow, okay. Well, I guess one thing that may have been surprising, I don't know if it caught you off guard, one thing that was fascinating about this case is that it was about to go to trial. It seemed like it was heading there. In fact, both sides, and I believe the jury had already been selected, they were seated, and everybody was getting mic'd up and getting ready for this trial to begin. And that's when there was this pause and a delay, and then it slowly came out that they had reached a settlement. Were you surprised, perhaps, by the timing of this, that this took place really right on the cusp, on the eve of the trial?
It seems surprising. It's not customary, but I wasn't surprised.
Okay.
Because many reasons. They have so many lawyers working on that case. With all these hourly rates, they're probably paying $50,000 a day for trial. So you got a 6-week trial. Now you have multi-million-dollar additional attorney fees. Now that may not be a big deal when you have a $787 million judgment. And Fox News had $4.1 billion in cash at the end of the year. We know that because through the depositions and everything. But you take out the unknown. I've had trials, and I'll tell you one that came to mind. I've had a trial settle on the morning of the trial. We showed up. We were set up at our tables. The jury was being impaneled, and the judge sent us out. The judge had a hunch that we might be able to settle. The judge sent us out. And interestingly, I was representing a lawyer, and we were suing another lawyer. So there's all these lawyers, all these, anal retentive, very smart, very intense people trying to resolve it. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more intense than being in trial. But that 20 minutes out in the hall trying to settle it was probably the most intense 20 minutes I've ever had. And we did get it resolved, and the jury was sent home. So here, I suspect it was the same thing. They had probably been having settlement talks for months and months, and they might have been, $100 million away. And the morning of trial, everybody really, it's like a kind of come to Jesus moment where it's like, hey man, we're about to go to war. And so I bet in that moment, it was just a very intense moment, and it settled. So I've seen it happen. It's unusual, but I'm not surprised because you just don't want to go to trial if you can avoid it because you don't know what's going to happen.
We're going to kind of get into that here in just a second. By the way, $50,000 a day. I quit. I'm going to law school.
Well, that's like 20 lawyers, at these hourly rates of $400, $500, $1,000. And these are high-powered lawyers. You got a whole team. You got paralegals. You got your tech team, so you can put up the exhibits quickly. I mean, it's a serious situation.
Yeah, well, obviously worth noting there. I'll transition back to kind of something that you said that I thought was quite interesting, is the fact that you were quite convinced that Dominion was going to end up winning this. But that said, the defamation bar to clear, and something you've said here several times before, it is a high bar to clear. You have to basically definitively prove, correct, that Fox News knowingly was going to be telling lies, but you felt confident based on what you saw that Fox News hosts not only knew that the 2020 election was not stolen, it had nothing to do with Dominion voting systems, that they were perpetrating those lies knowingly and falsely? Was that bar cleared?
Yes, I think so. I mean, of course, there was no evidence because the trial never went forward. So there's not evidence until it's presented and accepted in trial. But here, you're right that the actual malice element is that they have to know it was false or show a reckless disregard for the truth. And there were enough hosts that said behind the facts, sent texts, that they knew that the election lie was a hoax. And so knowingly saying, hey, we know this is a hoax. It's as if you and I, before we come on here and I go, Chris, everything I'm about to say here is not true. I know that. And then I come on and say it. And there's evidence of that. So, yeah, I think they would have been able to make that, prove that element. And Dominion is the plaintiff. So in a civil trial, the burden of proof is a preponderance of the evidence. So, for example, in a criminal trial, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecution has to, so the jury says, I have no doubt that this defendant did it. In a civil trial, the preponderance of evidence is slightly more than not. So so Dominion,
So it's 60-40 rather than 90-10 or
I'd say
100.
51-49.
Interesting.
So if the jury said, you know what, I don't believe any of them, I can't decide, the defendant would win in that case. But if they go, I think they all lied, but I slightly believe the plaintiff, then they win. And here, there was just a plethora of evidence, both documentary evidence and witness testimony, showing that a lot of these people knew that this was false.
But, okay, let me... we're going to talk hypotheticals here. This case is obviously settled, but I think it's interesting because this could relate to moving forward. This is a jury system, so all it takes potentially, I'm going to put it out there, there's one, Fox News, the most watched cable news network in the country, takes somebody who maybe really likes Fox News on a jury. You don't know who you're getting, right? I mean...
that's true, and that's why before every trial, the judge, there's something called voir dire, where the lawyers and the judge get to ask the jury questions to determine their bias. And if they're, but nobody's going to come out and say, yeah, I definitely hate. Most people try and say, yeah, I think I can be unbiased, but the judge will really press on them and really try to get an unbiased jury. And of course, a lot of people will admit, they'll say, I don't think I can be objective. And so I do believe, I've had many, many jury trials, and I believe in the system, and I believe that jurors really try and get it right. But you are correct. If somebody, gave the right answers, no, I can be objective, and they seemed very sincere, and then they came through and said, no, I just will not, I'm not going to rule against Fox, right? Then you may have a hung jury. And then, of course, you could go back to trial. I mean, that happens. I've had a lot of jury trials, and I've never had a hung jury. I've had juries that stayed out for a couple days, which is pretty intense. But yes, you're right. That's why a lot of people will. Why settlement makes sense. I've had a lot of success as a litigator, but I always encourage my clients to settle. If we can settle, it's something they can live with, because it's just you can have a juror that just might not like the lawyers. And again, I believe in the system where people we have a jury system, people get to watch, they get to look at the witnesses, determine their credibility, weigh the evidence, and I think people really try and get it right, but that's a risk.
Give me some context here. $787.5 million. How big of a settlement is that in a defamation case?
Well, that's one of the biggest in America. But at this point, we have these huge corporations. I mean, Fox has $4.4 billion in cash on hand, so they can write a check. They don't need insurance. They don't have to sell assets. They have this covered. So, in one respect, I'm saying this is a massive settlement. But on the other hand, I'm saying this is not going to really harm their bottom. It'll affect their bottom line, but they're still rolling. And I think the bigger issue would have been, had they went through the trial, there would have been witnesses on the stand having to acknowledge certain things, and that would
Tucker Carlson, Rupert Murdoch would have had to go up, right?
All of the yes, and then that would have been running constantly on a loop in the news. And for the Fox viewers, then where does that leave them? I mean, for those that blindly just follow these opinionated statements, I'd say be more critical in your analysis. But if you trust them as objective journalists, and then you hear them say, I don't believe what I'm actually reporting, but I'm going to do it for ratings, that would be hard to swallow.
All right, let's look forward a little bit here, because this is not the only election-related litigation that's facing Fox News here. What other cases are there out there, and what sort of chances do they have for either getting a settlement or going to trial?
There's a number of cases. I have to refer to my notes because there's a few big ones. So one is the Smartmatic. That was one that was filed in 2021. They're actually seeking $2.7 billion, and that one was where the Fox folks were saying Smartmatic was involved in 6 battleground states, and they only had machines in LA County. So it was completely false, and they suffered significantly. So $2.7 billion on that one, and
that's more than what Dominion sought even initially. I think they sought 1.8, and then they brought it down to 1.6, settled for $800 million, or a little less.
Right. And they had filed a number. Fox had filed a number of motions to dismiss and for the case not to go forward. And just last month, the judge ruled, yes, it can go forward. So we may see another big settlement in that one. Another important case is Abby Grossberg. She was a Fox News producer, and she has 2 lawsuits. One of them involves Tucker Carlson, and she's saying that there was an environment of sexual misogyny, and I don't think she quite said sexual harassment, essentially, in a number of different ways. And then the second one is that she was coached and intimidated on how to go forward in her deposition. So she had her deposition taken in the Dominion case, but the lawyers and the execs were putting pressure on her to testify a certain way. And so that's what she's suing for on that front. So that thing is a mess. And then the other big one is the Fox investors. The shareholders are demanding company records to determine if executives oversaw the election rigging claims and what they knew. And in some of those, it's a derivative lawsuit, if the shareholders win, there could be liability for the directors, the board of directors, personally, each of the members of the board of directors. So that one, and why this is relevant is because even if somebody takes a deposition and it's sealed so it won't be released to the public, that can be used in these other lawsuits, even though it can't be disseminated to the public because they're testifying under oath about the same thing. So if they say one thing here, that will be used to impeach them here. So these lawsuits are significant. This was a massive settlement that we just saw, but these cases, Fox is in real trouble. And
do you think legally they'll have to be more careful moving forward?
Absolutely. The 2024 election, they're going to have to cover it in a whole nother way because we saw that they just were not accurately reporting.
All right. Well, 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor, appreciate your insight and lending us your expertise about the Fox Dominion settlement and a lot of the fireworks that surrounded it. I suppose we will not be done talking about Fox News here based on what you've got there moving forward. But what do you think?
I'll be tracking these, and I'll be back for a follow-up, I'm sure.
We'll have you back then. So,
right.
Whitney Traylor, thanks for joining us.